Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this other edition of On Policy. Thanks for being with us. I am Mr. Ayukmba, Senior Communications Manager for the Denis and Lenora Foretia Foundation. And today we have a guest in the house, and we will be talking about boosting think tanks' resilience within the Central African region. But before I introduce my guest to you, let's have a break and we'll come later. Welcome back to this edition of the On Policy. Like I earlier mentioned, we are receiving in the house today Mr. Enrique Mendizabal, the CEO and founder of OTT, otherwise known as On Think Tanks. You're welcome, Mr. Enrique.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. With you, we're going to be talking about boosting think tanks' resilience within the Central African governance ecosystem. And the quick question I want to put to you is, think tanks are seldom invited to the table for policy making and policy shaping for many reasons, but peculiar to Central Africa. There is an impression that think tanks are not really credible. They are not doing the job. Why did we get to this level from your perspective, and how?
Right, thank you. Thank you for the question. The first thing I would say is that think tanks are seldom invited to the table when it comes to designing policies anywhere in the world. In countries where the civil service is stronger, is well-resourced, well-funded, that's the job of the civil service. And politicians tend to engage with civil servants directly in the policy formulation. They take ideas from the rest of society, whether it's the private sector, through their lobbies or associations, from academia, from civil society organizations, NGOs, campaigning NGOs, or from think tanks. So think tanks are one more source of ideas and input and inspiration, if you want, when it comes to putting together a policy. Having said that, I think in some countries, think tanks, in particular local think tanks, sometimes are rejected with a little bit more emphasis and enthusiasm.
Like it's the case in Central Africa.
Like you're saying, it's the case in Central Africa. I think that has to do with many things, not just with a lack of credibility of the think tank. Often it has to do with a lack of confidence of the government to opening up the process and allowing external actors to join in and have conversations, which sometimes, if you're not sure about what you're doing, if you yourselves do not have all the resources to make all the right decisions, might not make the right choices, and you don't want to lose face to some extent.
Definitely. With
the general public. There's an element of credibility for sure. There's an element of, as I say, controlling the process and not wanting to lose control if you invite too many actors. But the other thing is also an element of incentives, right? Okay. I don't know if the media, I don't know if wider civil society, I don't know if development partners who play an important role are to some extent putting pressure or creating incentives for government to open it up a bit more and to be more willing to engage with think tanks in particular.
Okay. May I say this, that in Central Africa, there's that general feeling that think tanks are literally begging for credibility. I don't know how On Think Tanks managed to pave its way, because On Think Tank has some credibility, some influence within the space. I don't know if you want to share this experience with the think tankers in Central Africa so that they know about going about building their credibility and making more impact within the region.
Yes, I should say that On Think Tanks is not a think tank in the way that Nkafu Policy Institute, for instance, is a think tank.
Okay.
We study think tanks and their ecosystem, and we advise them. Sometimes we're called a think tank for think tanks.
Okay.
Having said that, I think some of the things we've done to boost our credibility within our field is what other think tanks do in other parts of the world. One of the things you have to do, I recommend think tanks do, is to focus at first on the problem.
Okay.
Not jump to offer recommendations right away, but spend some time thinking about what are the issues that the government, the country, society, different actors are facing, and try to win that argument. trying to win the argument over the problem with government. Right? So if they agree with you that there is a problem and that a problem can be tackled, then when you come with solutions, you will be seen as much more credible for this.
Okay.
Another thing is that this is a long game, and it's a very long game.
Okay.
So you don't gain credibility overnight. You certainly don't gain credibility by calling yourselves a think tank.
Definitely.
Because the label think tank often is associated with, less than high standard academic, right? Or it's associated with NGO advocacy. Depending on the country, certain countries have different ways of understanding the label.
Okay.
So it'll take time, and it will not be a linear kind of always progressive, always in the rise process. Even the most credible think tanks like the Brookings Institution, when the Republicans are in government, the number of times they're called to give testimony in Congress falls significantly. When the Democrats are in power, the number of times goes up again. So the fact that you're not being called to the table, the fact that you're not being consulted, does not necessarily reflect a lack of credibility. Okay. It might reflect that they don't agree with you, they don't find you useful, they don't find it necessary to engage with you.
Okay, with the present state of the governance ecosystem in Central Africa, what kind of collaborations or partnership will you advise think tanks to have, maybe with the private sector, with the media, and with other stakeholders in the ecosystem?
So from what I understand about what's happening in Central Africa, and I'm not an expert, I've been learning as I go, it seems to me that you have a shrinking civic space, the space for think tanks and other civil society organizations to operate, is getting harder, and that the relationship with governments are also getting harder. That means that there's a need and an opportunity to engage with other actors of society. You mentioned the private sector, of course, other NGOs, universities, business associations, trade unions that want to have a say, want to engage with government, or want to try to change the narratives that are kind of shaping the policy discussions.
Okay.
Many of these actors do not have the practical evidence that think tanks can provide. So one way is to make yourselves useful to media. When journalists want to interview a political leader, they need evidence, they need data, they need analysis so that they have good arguments and good comeback questions. Well, think tanks can provide that if they're smart and they reach out to them. The business leaders, what they're interested probably is in a stable business environment. Who's good at thinking about that? Think tanks are good at thinking about the policy environment and the policy regime that can be beneficial for businesses to thrive. So engaging with them, collaborating with them can be very, very useful.
Okay, with the situation you just described, this shrinking civic space in which think tanks operate with or in, what is a contribution that you think tanks can bring on the table for the betterment of the policy-making process in particular and governance in general?
Yeah, it's a good question, because what that means is that when you see a shrinking civic space, when you see certain practices of government, of certain groups in power that are not necessarily allowing civil society to work freely and to contribute to their society, that usually comes with the weakening of policymaking processes, right? They don't work as well. So I think think tanks there need to reflect on whether their objectives should continue to be changing policy, say changing policy on education, changing policy on health, changing policy on trade, or actually trying to change the way policy is done. So reflect a little bit more about how is government operating? How is the relationship between the government and the rest of society developing? What's going on? What's breaking down in those relationships, which is what's happening.
Exactly.
And then try to make recommendations to avoid further deterioration or to improve, as you said, the policymaking process. If the policymaking process improves, right? If sort of the cycle of policymaking is a little bit more established, is a bit more better informed, is more predictable, then maybe that's when you go back to, okay, I'm going to start looking at
Shaping
education,
policies.
shaping the policy on education, shaping the policy on trade. Right? It's a bit of a, what's your priority right now?
All right. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Enrique. It was a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to answer your questions.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is where we put an end to the show. Thank you for listening and see you next time.